The sound of my own laughter surprised me. It was a light, tinkling thing, the kind I'd perfected over 15 years of marriage, but tonight it felt like shards of glass in my throat. I was standing near the grand marble fireplace, a flute of champagne I hadn't asked for and didn't want cool in my hand, listening to my husband, David, hold court, a kept woman? David's voice boomed, rich with amusement, cutting through the polite hum of his company's annual gala. He slung a heavy arm around my shoulders, pulling me tight against his side. The gesture felt less like an embrace and more like a claim. My Evelyn? Honey, tell them about your day. Go on, he grinned down at me, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners in that way the society pages love to call devastatingly charming. I knew every micro-expression on that face. I saw the faint sheen of sweat on his brow from his third scotch, the subtle tightening of his jaw that meant he was performing. He was always performing, the man who'd spoken, a portly board member named Robert whose name I made a point to forget, chuckled nervously. Oh, come now, David. It's a term of endearment. Look at her. The perfect wife, the beautiful home, the charity galas, the everything. You've built quite the gilded cage for this one. The words, gilded cage, hung in the air, shimmering with a truth he couldn't possibly comprehend. I felt David's fingers dig a little deeper into my shoulder. A warning. Or perhaps a reassurance. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. I tilted my head, letting a soft, demure smile play on my lips, the Evelyn smile. Robert, you flatter me, I said, my voice a gentle murmur. David works so hard. The least I can do is make our home a sanctuary, David beamed, puffing out his chest. See? A sanctuary. She's my rock. Couldn't do any of this without her. He swept his hand, indicating the opulent ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the swirling mass of wealth and power that was Hastings Innovations. It was his kingdom. Or so he believed, as the small crowd around us laughed, a familiar, comforting warmth. I let my gaze drift across the room. It landed on a severe, elegant woman in a stark black dress, standing alone near a potted fern. Agatha. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no smile, no nod. Just a flicker of understanding, like the brief, silent flash of a lighthouse in a foggy night. Then she turned and melted back into the crowd. That single glance was an anchor in the roaring sea of my charade. It was a reminder of the ledger, not the one David's accountants managed, but the real one, the one written in 15 years of quiet sacrifices, of swallowed pride, of dreams deferred. The one where, line by meticulous line, I had been buying my freedom, and in the process, had quietly acquired his soul. He thought I was a kept woman. He didn't know I own 90% of his company. The gala was a symphony of everything David loved, noise, admiration, and the intoxicating scent of his own success. We glided through the throng, a perfect, photogenic unit. He was the brilliant, visionary founder. I was the serene, supportive wife. The narrative was as polished and unchanging as the family portraits lining the hallway of our mansion. Later, in the back of the silent, leather-scented interior of the Rolls-Royce, the mask began to crack. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows, painting David's profile in fleeting strokes of gold and shadow. You were magnificent tonight, Evie, he slurred slightly, leaning his head back against the seat. The way you handled Robert. Perfect? They all see it. They see the life I've given you. I didn't look at him. I watched the ghost of my reflection in the window, superimposed over the passing city. He called me a kept woman, David. He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture expansive and clumsy. A joke. A bad one. He's jealous. They all are. He turned his head towards me, his expression turning serious, a look I knew well. It was the prelude to a monologue about his burdens. You have no idea the pressure, Evelyn. The board, the shareholders. It's a constant battle. A lion's den. I have to be the lion tamer every single day. For us. For this, for us. The words were a hollow echo in the luxurious tomb of our marriage. There was no us. There hadn't been for years. There was David, and there was the woman who played the part of his wife. We arrived home. Home was a 12,000 square foot contemporary monstrosity of glass and steel that David had commissioned, a monument to his taste, which was expensive but had no soul. It was cold, echoing, and impeccably clean, like a museum after hours. I went through the motions. I poured him a glass of water and set out his vitamins for the morning. I listened as he mumbled about a problematic VP before his breathing evened out into the soft, rumbling snores of the drunk and self-satisfied. I stood in the doorway of his bedroom, we had slept in separate wings for 3 years, and watched him for a moment. He looked younger in sleep, the hard lines of ambition and avarice smoothed away. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pity, but a distant, archaeological sadness for the man he might have once been, the man I thought I'd married. Then I turned and walked away, my heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor, the sound echoing in the vast, empty space. My sanctuary wasn't the living room with its $1,000,000 art collection or the chef's kitchen I never used. It was my study. A room David never entered because he found it quaint. It was lined with books that were actually read, and in the bottom drawer of the antique writing desk, hidden beneath a false bottom, was my world, a slim, silver laptop, a set of keys to a safety deposit box, and a single, framed photograph of my father, a man who had built a small, thriving tech firm with his own 2 hands and a relentless, quiet intelligence he had passed on to his only daughter. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed, a cool, blue eye in the dim room. I opened the encrypted file simply labeled Ethelred. It was the code name I'd given the project years ago, a private joke from the history books I loved, Ethelred the Unready, a king who was ill-advised and lost his kingdom. My husband, the modern Ethelred, was about to lose his. The file contained the records of my silent coup. It had started small, almost as a game, a way to keep my mind sharp during the long, lonely afternoons. David would come home, bursting with bravado about a brilliant, aggressive move he'd made, a competitor he'd crushed, and I, who had grown up at my father's knee, who had a degree in finance he'd forgotten about, would see the flaw, the hubris, the overreach. I began with my inheritance. My father, wary of David's flashy charm from the start, had left his entire estate to me in an ironclad trust. It wasn't a fortune on the scale David liked to play with, but it was a significant seed. David had dismissed it, of course. Play money, he'd called it. Your little safety net. I planted that seed in the darkest, richest soil I could find, David's own fears. It was after a particularly bad quarter, early on. Hastings Innovations was bleeding cash due to a failed product launch. David was volatile, paranoid. He was convinced his co-founder, a gentle, brilliant man named Michael, was plotting against him. He came to me for comfort, for the wifely platitudes he expected. I should force him out, David had raged, pacing the length of our then smaller living room. But buying his shares. The company can't afford it right now. The vultures are circling. I had poured him a drink, my hands steady. What if I could help? I'd asked, my voice soft, non-threatening. He'd looked at me, confused. How? My trust fund, I'd said. I could loan the company the money to buy Michael out. It would be a business transaction. You get full control, and well, I get to feel like I'm truly a part of your world. The vanity of it appealed to him. The idea of his wife, his rock, bailing him out, securing his throne. He never questioned my motives, never looked beyond the surface. He saw what he wanted to see, the devoted wife. He agreed. The papers were drawn up by Agatha, my father's old lawyer and the only person on earth I trusted completely. David barely read them. He was too busy celebrating his victory. That was the first brick. Michael's 20% stake, now held in my name. Over the years, the pattern repeated. A cash flow crisis during an expansion. A hostile takeover scare. A need for a quick, quiet capital injection to smooth over a regulatory issue. Every time David panicked, every time his back was against the wall, I was there. Not with nagging worry, but with a serene, simple solution. Darling, don't fret. My investments have done well. Let me help, and he let me. Each time, the transactions grew more complex, the strings attached more invisible, yet more unbreakable. I used shell companies, trusts with names pulled from mythology, all managed by Agatha's ruthless, brilliant mind. We were ghosts in the machine of his own company, our ownership stake growing like a silent, benevolent cancer. He was so busy being the lion, roaring at the front of the cage, he never noticed who was slowly, patiently, buying the zoo. The final, masterful play had come just last year. The Spectrum Project. David's big, legacy-defining gamble. It was ambitious, technologically dazzling, and catastrophically expensive. It required a final, massive round of funding. The traditional investors were skittish. The banks were demanding untenable terms. I found him in his study, head in his hands, the picture of despair. It was a performance, I knew. He loved the drama of it almost as much as the success. It's over, Evelyn, he'd groaned. After all this, Spectrum will bankrupt us. I'll be a laughingstock. I knelt beside his chair, placing a gentle hand on his knee, the very image of wifely support. No, I'd whispered, my voice fierce with a conviction that was entirely real, though its source was a mystery to him. It won't. I believe in you. In Spectrum. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic hope. What can you do? This is too big, even for your nest egg. I have a friend, I said, the lie smooth and rehearsed. An investment group. Silent, deep pockets. They're fascinated by Spectrum. They'll provide the capital, but they want a significant stake. A controlling interest. In fact, I held my breath. This was the moment. He would have to choose between his pride and his company. He'd stared at me, a war raging behind his eyes. Then, the pragmatism of the truly avaricious won out. A controlling interest? He'd repeated, his voice hoarse. 51%, I'd said calmly. They remain silent partners. You remain the CEO, the public face. You get to launch Spectrum. You get your legacy. The battle in his face was almost pitiable. His kingdom, or his crown? In the end, he chose the crown. The illusion of power was more important to him than the power itself. He signed the papers, selling the majority of his life's work to a shell corporation called Ethelred Holdings, never knowing he was signing it over to his wife. With that single signature, my stake climbed to 90%. He was left with a mere 10, and the grand, empty title of CEO. Spectrum, of course, was a phenomenal success. It revolutionized its sector. The company's valuation quadrupled. David was hailed as a visionary genius. He preened and gave interviews, accepting accolades for a triumph that was, in every meaningful sense, mine. He was the flag planted on the summit, but I was the one who had financed, engineered, and built the entire mountain. And now, he was laughing, calling me a kept woman. I closed the laptop. The glow faded, leaving me in the soft, pre-dawn gloom. The anger I had swallowed for years, the humiliation I had digested and transformed into cold, hard equity, was no longer a quiet ember. It was a roaring fire. The ledger was full. The debt was due. The plan had always been to wait. To let him enjoy his hollow victory a little longer before I pulled the rug out from under his entire world. But tonight had changed things, the smug condescension in Robert's voice, the possessive grip of David's hand on my shoulder, the casual, public dismissal of my entire existence. It was the last straw. The time for waiting was over. The next morning, David was predictably hungover, but buoyed by the lingering high of the gala's success. He sat at the breakfast nook, squinting at his tablet, the financial news glowing on the screen. Look at that, he mumbled, tapping the screen. Hastings stock up another 3%. They love me. I placed a cup of black coffee in front of him. They love Spectrum, I corrected gently. He waved a hand. Same thing. He took a sip of coffee and winced. God, my head. That party was a triumph, though. You were great, Evie. Really. His praise was as perfunctory as his interest in my life. David, I began, my voice calm, neutral. I was thinking about what Robert said last night. He groaned. Not that again. Forget him. The man's an idiot. It's not just him, I said, sitting down opposite him. It's the perception. I feel like I'm just an accessory to you. The kept woman. I want to be more involved. He looked up, genuinely puzzled. Involved? In what? The charity board? I thought you enjoyed that. In the company, I said, holding his gaze. He blinked, then a slow, condescending smile spread across his face. Oh, honey. That's sweet. But my world. It's brutal. It's cutthroat. It's no place for you. You have your own things. Your gardens, your charities, leave the business to the lions, okay? The lions. He actually called himself a lion. To my face, I felt a cold smile touch my lips. You're right, I said, my tone shifting, losing its softness, gaining an edge he had never heard before. It is a lion's den. But you've misidentified the predator, his smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, leaning forward slightly, that I'm tired of being your sanctuary. I'm tired of being your rock. I built that sanctuary, David. And I'm the rock your entire world is about to shatter against. He stared at me, his hangover-addled brain struggling to catch up. Evelyn, what the hell are you talking about? Are you feeling all right? I've never felt better. I stood up, my movements crisp and decisive. I'll be in my study. I have a call with Agatha in 10 minutes. We have some corporate matters to discuss. Board matters. The word board seemed to snap him to attention. Agatha? My father's old lawyer? Why are you talking to her about board matters? Not your board, David, I said, pausing at the doorway. I turned and looked at him, really looked at him, not as his wife, but as his majority shareholder. I let him see the cold, calculating intelligence I had hidden from him for 15 years. My board, I left him there, his mouth slightly agape, a confused and slowly dawning fear in his eyes. The first domino had been tipped. The call with Agatha was brief and efficient. It's time, I said. I heard the faint rustle of papers on her end. The special meeting? She asked, her voice devoid of surprise. Schedule it for Friday. 10 a.m. Use the clause in the Ethelred agreement. I want him there. I want the entire board there. He'll be served notice today, she confirmed. Evelyn. Are you ready for this? The fallout. I looked out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn, a symbol of a life that had never been mine. I've been ready for 15 years, Agatha. I was born ready. The next 2 days were a study in surreal tension. David was a storm cloud contained within the glass walls of our house. He tried to confront me, his tone shifting from confusion to bluster to a strange, panicked tweedling. Evelyn, this isn't funny. What is this Ethelred Holdings? Why are they calling a special board meeting? What have you done? I remained an island of calm. Everything will be clear on Friday, David. Have you been talking to someone? Have you gotten yourself involved in something? The implication was clear. He thought I was having an affair, that I was being manipulated by a lover. The idea was so ludicrous I almost laughed. My affair had been with a spreadsheet, my lover a percentage point. He couldn't conceive of me as the mastermind. His ego was his ultimate blind spot. On Friday morning, I dressed with more care than I had for the gala. I chose a severe, impeccably tailored black Prada suit. It was armor. I pulled my hair back into a tight, low chignon and applied a slash of crimson lipstick. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a powerful, formidable woman. I saw the ghost of my father. I saw myself. David was waiting in the foyer, pacing. He was wearing his best power suit, the one he wore for hostile takeover defenses. He looked pale. "Let's go," he snapped, not looking at me. "I don't know what game you're playing, Evelyn, but it ends today. I'll handle this Ethelred nonsense." We drove to the Hastings Innovations Tower in silence. He stared out his window, his jaw clenched, mentally rehearsing his battle lines. I looked out mine, a strange, quiet peace settling over me. The boardroom was on the top floor, a temple of glass and polished dark wood with a breathtaking view of the city. The entire board was there, including the portly Robert, who had the good grace to look uncomfortable when I walked in. Agatha was already seated at the far end of the table, a stack of folders in front of her. She gave me a barely perceptible nod. David strode to the head of the table, his customary place. "All right, Agatha," he began, his voice strained with forced authority. "Let's get this over with. What is the meaning of this? What does Ethelred want? If it's a shake-up, they can forget it. I built this company." Agatha didn't even look up from her papers. "The chair recognizes the majority shareholder of Hastings Innovations," she said, her voice cool and clear. David blinked. "What?" I walked forward. I didn't stop at one of the subordinate chairs. I walked right up to the head of the table, to David's side. "David," I said, my voice ringing in the silent, tense room. "You're in my seat." The room froze. Robert's jaw dropped. The other board members looked at each other in confusion. David let out a short, incredulous bark of laughter. "Evelyn, for God's sake, this is not the time for your hysterics. Sit down." I ignored him. I placed my leather portfolio on the table, right in front of his hands. "The majority shareholder of Hastings Innovations," I repeated, locking eyes with him, "is Ethelred Holdings, and I said, letting the words hang in the air for a beat, am the sole owner and principal of Ethelred Holdings." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. David's face went through a rapid, terrifying series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a pure, unadulterated rage. That's impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Is it?" I asked softly. I turned to the board. "Gentlemen, for the past decade, through a series of strategic capital injections, I have been acquiring shares in this company. The initial purchase of Michael's stake, the bridge loans during the 18 crisis, the Series C funding for the Nexus project, and finally, the Spectrum rescue package. As of my last transaction, I hold a 90% controlling interest in Hastings Innovations." I opened my portfolio and slid copies of the summarized ownership documents down the table. They slithered across the polished wood like snakes. David snatched one up, his hands trembling. He scanned the page, his eyes wide with terror. I watched as the numbers, the cold, hard facts, dismantled his reality brick by brick. His shoulders slumped, the color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly, waxy pale. "You!" he choked out, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You did this? All of it, every last share," I confirmed, my voice cold and steady. "You were so busy building your empire, David, you never noticed who was financing the foundation. You were so proud of not having a kept woman for a wife, you never realized you were the one who was kept." The word "kept" landed with the force of a physical blow. He flinched. "My first motion as majority shareholder," I announced, turning my back on him to address the stunned board, "is to call for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO, David Hastings, effective immediately." "You can't do this!" David roared, slamming his fists on the table. "This is my company. I'm David Hastings, you were David Hastings," I corrected him, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Now, you're a minority shareholder with a 10% stake and a very generous severance package, which Agatha has drawn up. You can take it, or you can fight me in court. But I should warn you, I own the judge, the jury, and the entire goddamn courthouse." I saw the fight leave his eyes. He looked around the table, at the faces of the men he had commanded, Men who were now avoiding his gaze, already calculating the new power dynamic. He was utterly, completely alone. "Why?" he whispered, the sound torn from his throat. "Why would you do this to me?" And finally, I let him see it. All of it. The 15 years of loneliness. The condescension. The way he'd taken my father's legacy and dismissed it as play money. The way he'd reduced me to a prop in the story of his life. "You laughed when he called me a kept woman," I said, my voice trembling not with sadness, but with a long-suppressed fury. "You didn't know I own 90% of your company. You didn't know that every time you patted my head and told me to go arrange the flowers, I was quietly arranging your obsolescence. You didn't know that the sanctuary you were so proud of was my command center. You didn't know me at all." I turned to Agatha. "Please have security escort Mr. Hastings from the building. He is no longer welcome in any capacity." As two uniformed guards entered the room, David seemed to shrink. The great lion of industry was just a man, a deflated, broken man being led out of his own kingdom. He didn't look at me as he passed, his head bowed in defeat. The door clicked shut behind him. The room was silent again. All eyes were on me. I smoothed down the front of my suit and took my seat at the head of the table. The leather was cool and firm beneath me. "Now, gentlemen," I said, my voice crisp and authoritative, the voice of the woman who owned it all. "Let's talk about the future of this company." And as I began to speak, outlining my vision, my plans, I felt the final pieces of the old Evelyn fall away.